The man history would remember as Genghis Khan was not born into greatness. He entered the world in 1162 on the windswept Mongolian steppe, a land both vast and merciless, where the horizon seemed endless but survival was never guaranteed. His birth name was Temujin, and his childhood was defined not by glory, but by abandonment, betrayal, and hunger. In this environment, every tribe was both neighbor and rival, and every alliance could collapse with a single betrayal. The story of how this boy became the most feared conqueror in human history begins not with triumph, but with near destruction. Temujin's father, Yesuge, was a respected tribal leader of the Borjigin clan. Yet even as he celebrated his son's birth, fate struck swiftly. Yesuge was poisoned by rivals when Temujin was still a child. Overnight, the boy who had been the son of a Khan became the son of no one. His mother, Holan, was left to raise her children alone, cast out by the clan that once owed them loyalty. Their food was whatever they could scavenge: wild berries, small animals trapped in snares, roots dug from the unforgiving earth. Temujin's family survived, but only just. These scars of hunger would later shape a man who demanded absolute loyalty and punished betrayal with unmatched cruelty. But hardship was not Temujin's only lesson. As a boy, he learned the harsh laws of the steppe. Trust was fragile, betrayal inevitable, and only strength could ensure survival. Even within his own family, rivalries cut deep. At one point, Temujin killed his half-brother Bekta during a dispute over food, an act that horrified his mother, but also marked the young boy as someone who would never share power willingly. As he grew, Temujin began to show an unusual ability to inspire loyalty among companions. Steppe politics revolved around bloodlines and shifting alliances, but Temujin's gift was forging bonds not just through kinship, but through trust and shared hardship. He gathered a small band of sworn brothers, men who would later become the nucleus of the Mongol war machine. Among them was Jamuka, who at first was Temujin's closest ally and later his bitterest enemy. Yet the road to power was not smooth. Temujin's early rise was marked by cycles of loyalty and betrayal. Rivals like the Taichiud clan captured him and enslaved him for months, keeping him in a crude wooden collar to prevent escape. That could have been the end of his story, just another forgotten life swallowed by the steppe. But Temujin escaped, aided by a sympathetic guard. This moment, when his chains fell away, foreshadowed the resilience that would define his life. Every setback was temporary, every betrayal a lesson. By his late teens and early 20s, Temujin had begun to gather momentum. He married Bort, a woman whose importance went far beyond companionship. In Mongol society, marriages forged alliances as much as they did families, and Bort's union with Temujin tied him to the Ongirat tribe, one of the steppe's most influential powers. But even this victory was quickly shadowed by danger. Not long after their marriage, Bort was kidnapped by the Merkit, an old enemy clan. Temujin was forced to rely on allies, including his sworn brother Jamuka and the powerful ruler Torol of the Karaites, to rescue her. Together, they succeeded. Bort returned, and with her came both personal vindication and political legitimacy. Every step of Temujin's early life was a struggle to turn weakness into strength. He knew hunger, betrayal, slavery, and the constant threat of annihilation. Yet out of these trials emerged a leader unlike any the steppe had seen before. He reorganized his followers not by bloodline, but by loyalty and merit, a revolutionary idea in a world ruled by tribal hierarchy. Warriors who fought bravely rose in rank, while nobles who failed him were cast aside. This meritocracy forged bonds stronger than kinship and gave him an army that fought with a unity other tribes could not match. Still, his position was precarious. For all his growing influence, Temujin was not yet the unchallenged master of the steppe. Rivals plotted against him, alliances shifted like sand in the wind, and enemies waited for the moment to strike. He had risen from the ashes of abandonment to the edge of power, but every step forward left him surrounded by foes in the shadows. And so, as we leave this chapter of his story, the stage is set, a man forged in hardship, hardened by betrayal, and sharpened into a leader capable of uniting the steppe. But as history would show, even Genghis Khan, this man destined to conquer half the known world, would one day come within a breath of losing it all. Transition hook: what happens when the hunter becomes the hunted? In the next section, we step into the shadows of the Mongolian steppe, where Genghis's enemies, old and bitter, waited for their moment to strike. The rise of Temujin was not a quiet affair. Every victory he claimed, every alliance he forged, left scars on the steppe's fragile balance of power. For every tribe that joined him, another tribe burned with resentment, unwilling to bow before a man they considered an upstart. To them, Temujin was not yet the oceanic ruler history would remember as Genghis Khan. He was still just a rival who threatened centuries-old traditions and rivalries. The Mongolian steppe in the late 12th century was a shifting tapestry of clans and alliances. Among the fiercest of Temujin's enemies were the Tatar, a people long entangled with Chinese dynasties, who saw Temujin's rise as a direct threat to their dominance. The Merkit, too, remained sworn enemies, still bitter over Temujin's earlier campaigns to rescue his wife bought from their grasp. These were not just military opponents, they were personal enemies, carrying grudges that went back years, even decades. The Tatars, in particular, held a deep enmity for Temujin's family line. His father, Yesigey, had once poisoned a Tatar chief, sparking a blood feud that did not fade with time. To the Tatars, Temujin's very existence was an insult that demanded vengeance. This ancestral hatred simmered beneath every move they made, waiting for the day when blood could finally settle old scores. The Merkits, on the other hand, had been humiliated by Temujin's daring raid to recover Bort. On the steppe, honor was everything, and humiliation demanded repayment. For them, vengeance against Temujin was not optional, it was destiny. Then there was the matter of Temujin's old sworn brother, Jamuka. Once, they had ridden together as allies, sharing dreams of uniting the fractured tribes. But ambition tore them apart. Jamuka claimed leadership by noble lineage, while Temujin claimed it by merit and loyalty. Their rivalry exploded into open conflict, culminating in battles where entire clans were massacred. To Jamuka, Temujin was not just a rival, he was a traitor who had betrayed a brotherhood and defied the natural order of tribal power. Thus, the enemies gathered, the Tatars, the Merkit, and Jamuka, along with other clans fearful of Temujin's rising star. They whispered in the shadows of campfires, forging secret alliances, weaving plans like hunters circling prey. Temujin's power was growing, yes, but he was not invincible. And in the chaos of the steppe, even the strongest leader could be undone in a single night. The irony of Temujin's situation was this: his greatest strength, his meteoric rise, was also his greatest weakness. By reshaping Mongol politics through loyalty rather than bloodline, he threatened the old aristocracy. To traditionalists, he was a dangerous revolutionary undermining the steppe's ancient order. To rivals, he was a man with too many enemies and not enough years of dominance to protect him. And so, while Temujin celebrated victories and dreamed of uniting the steppe under one banner, his foes were quietly watching. They studied his movements, his alliances, his weaknesses. They knew that even the fiercest warriors had moments of vulnerability. They knew that Temujin was still human, and humans could bleed. The emotional weight of this moment lies in its inevitability. For the audience, we see the growing shadow of doom. The boy who had risen from abandonment was now surrounded by enemies thirsting for revenge. His hunger to unite the Mongols had brought him power, but it had also painted a target on his back. Transition hook. Temujin believed he was shaping destiny, but in the dark corners of the steppe, destiny's hunters were already waiting. In the next section, the trap begins to close, and the conqueror of nations finds himself moments away from annihilation. By the turn of the century, Temujin's growing power was undeniable. His banners flew across the steppe, and his warriors rode with unmatched discipline. To many, he looked unstoppable. Yet history teaches us that it is often at the height of confidence that fate sharpens its blade. For Temujin, that blade was being drawn in secret. The enemies he had made, the Tatars, the Merkit, and Jamuka's loyalists, were no longer just whispering in the dark. They were weaving a plot, each one contributing to a deadly design. The Tatars wanted vengeance for the blood feud that stretched back to Yesigey. The Merkit longed to erase the shame of Bort's rescue. Jamuka hungered for revenge against the brother-turned-rival who had dared to claim leadership over him. United by hate, they decided on one course of action: Temujin had to die. Ambush was the chosen method. On the open steppe, victory belonged to whoever controlled speed, surprise, and terrain. And though Temujin's armies were fast and disciplined, even he could not guard against betrayal from every direction. His enemies learned of his movements, tracking the routes he favored, and waiting for the perfect moment when his guard might falter. That moment came when Temujin was traveling with a smaller escort, distant from the bulk of his army. It was a rare chance, the conqueror separated from his overwhelming force. For enemies who had tasted his wrath in the past, it was almost too good to ignore. Plans were drawn, scouts were sent, and warriors took position in secret. For Temujin and his men, there were subtle signs, shadows on the horizon, the absence of expected allies, the uneasy silence of the steppe, that something was amiss. But leadership demands confidence, and Temujin pressed forward. After all, hesitation was as dangerous as recklessness. He trusted his instincts, yet even his instincts could not account for the sheer number of enemies lying in wait. In the tense hours before the strike, one can imagine the atmosphere in his camp. Fires burned low, horses shifted restlessly, and the wind carried with it a strange stillness. Temujin had faced betrayal before, but never on this scale. The conspirators were not a single tribe acting alone, they were a coalition of old hatreds, bound together for one purpose. For perhaps the first time since his rise, the great warlord stood truly vulnerable. This is the emotional heart of the story. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The boy who had survived exile, slavery, and endless betrayals was about to face the most dangerous test of his life, not through open battle, but through the silent jaws of a trap designed to erase him before his destiny could ever be fulfilled. Transition hook, and then it began. A storm of hooves, arrows, and blood erupted on the steppe. In the next section, we relive the ambush itself, the moment when Genghis Khan's life hung by a single thread. It began with the thunder of hooves. At first, only a faint tremor across the earth, an unease felt by the horses before it was heard by men. Then came the dark line on the horizon, swelling and splitting as riders poured forth, their banners snapping like the wings of ravens. In an instant, Temujin realized the truth: he was surrounded. The conspirators had chosen their ground wisely. The steppe near Baljuna offered cover in rolling hills and narrow valleys, perfect for springing a sudden assault. Temujin's escort, though loyal and skilled, was far too small to match the wave that now descended upon them. The air filled with the whine of arrows, blackening the sky. Warriors fell where they stood, horses screamed, and confusion tore through the camp. For a heartbeat, history itself seemed ready to end here. The man destined to unite the Mongols, the man who would one day shake the foundations of the known world, was caught in the jaws of a trap. And in that moment, he was not Genghis Khan. He was Temujin again, a man cornered, outnumbered, and one arrow away from annihilation. The attack struck fast and hard. The Tartars led the charge, their warriors driven by the memory of Yesugei's treachery generations earlier. Their arrows fell with merciless precision, cutting down Temujin's front line. Behind them surged the Merkit, their war cries fueled by vengeance for Bort's rescue. And looming over it all was the knowledge that Jamuka, the brother-turned-enemy, had helped weave this trap. But Temujin was no ordinary commander. Even in chaos, his mind turned to survival. He rallied his men into tight formations, forcing them to fight as a single unit rather than scatter. On the steppe, discipline often decided the line between survival and massacre. His warriors, trained under his revolutionary merit-based system, held firm while arrows hammered down. Then came the melee. Riders crashed together in a whirlwind of steel and blood. Temujin himself fought at the center, his presence both a beacon and a shield. Accounts speak of him taking wounds, narrowly escaping arrows that grazed his armor. Every moment was a gamble, one slip, one lucky strike from the enemy, and the future of the Mongol Empire would vanish before it ever began. The ambush was not just a battle of weapons, it was a battle of endurance. Temujin's smaller force could not hope to destroy their attackers outright. Their only chance was to break free, to carve a path through the encirclement and escape into the steppe. When the dust of battle finally settled, Temujin was alive, but only just. His camp was scattered, his warriors blooded, and many of his closest companions lay dead or dying. The ambush at Baljuna had come within a breath of ending his life and erasing his name from history. Yet survival, however narrow, was victory enough. On the steppe, to endure was to defy fate itself. Temujin gathered what remained of his men. The survivors bore wounds in body and spirit, but their loyalty did not waver. In those bleak hours, the bond between leader and warrior deepened. They had stared death in the face together, and in Temujin's refusal to fall, they found a renewed sense of purpose. These men became not merely soldiers, but brothers of blood and fire, bound by survival. The emotional weight of this moment was staggering. For Temujin, it was more than just an escape, it was a revelation. He had seen how quickly fortune could turn, how fragile power could be. But rather than break him, the experience hardened his resolve. If his enemies thought they had struck fear into his heart, they were wrong. What they had created was something far more dangerous, a man who would never again allow himself to be so vulnerable. From that point forward, Temujin demanded even stricter discipline from his followers. He reorganized his forces, ensuring no commander grew too powerful, and that loyalty flowed directly to him. Betrayal would be punished without hesitation, and cowardice would not be tolerated. In place of fear came ferocity, in place of weakness came ruthless efficiency. But survival was not enough. Temujin's nature demanded vengeance. The Tatars, the Merkit, Jamuka, all who had conspired against him, would feel the weight of his fury. In the years that followed, he launched brutal campaigns to annihilate his enemies, sparing few and sending a clear message across the steppe: betrayal against Temujin would end in obliteration. Villages were burned, clans were shattered, and survivors were enslaved or absorbed into his army. Each act of vengeance was both punishment and warning. For his followers, these campaigns were more than retribution, they were a promise of security. To ride under Temujin's banner was to know that loyalty would be repaid in protection, and betrayal would never go unanswered. His men came to believe that their leader carried not just the strength of. The ambush that nearly ended Temujin's life was not just a brush with death, it was a turning point. From that moment on, he carried with him the memory of vulnerability, a scar etched deeper than any wound to his flesh. He had seen how swiftly the winds of fortune could shift, how even the strongest could be brought low. And so he resolved never again to be caught unprepared. This resolve reshaped the way he led. Where once Temujin had trusted in alliances sealed by oath, he now placed his faith only in loyalty tested by fire. His system of organization, breaking clans and tribes into military units bound by discipline rather than bloodline, was refined and enforced with iron will. No longer would his fate rest in the hands of shifting tribal loyalties. Instead, he built an empire where power flowed directly through him, ensuring that betrayal would be nearly impossible. The lessons of Baljuna echoed in his later campaigns. He learned to use deception and ambush not only as threats to fear, but as weapons of his own. He became a master of surprise, striking swiftly and ruthlessly before his enemies could strike at him. The very tactics that once endangered his life became the tools that secured his domination. And domination did come. In the years that followed, Temujin cast off his birth name and took on a new title, Genghis Khan, Universal Ruler. Under this name, he forged the Mongol Empire, a force that stretched across continents and reshaped the medieval world. His enemies who once circled in the shadows were annihilated, their clans scattered like dust on the steppe. Yet behind the triumph lay the ghost of that ambush. History often remembers Genghis Khan as invincible, but the truth is more fragile, more human. His empire, his legend, even the fate of half the known world, all of it balanced on a knife's edge during those hours at Baljuna. A single arrow, a single sword stroke, and the world we know today might have been utterly different. Closing hook, and so the question lingers, what if the ambush had succeeded? What if the man who would become Genghis Khan had fallen that day? The course of history turned on survival, and in surviving, he carved his destiny into the bones of nations.